There is one man who has consistently been profitable near the top of best ball leaderboards over the last few years. That man, Justin Herzig of Established a Run, joins me tonight to draft a team together, talk over our approach to best ball in 2024. This is the Fantasy Sanctuary DraftKings Best Ball Show. Let's get into it. Yes, that's right. I'm joined by Justin Herzig in the unofficial home of best ball in Europe, Fantasy Sanctuary. Justin, you've been grinding the best ball streets since long before Underdog, long before DraftKings got into the game. Like, has anything about 2024 best ball surprised you so far?
Appreciate the invitation. Glad to be here. Yeah, it is nice to join our friends from across the pond. And let's see, surprises for this year. I think the general just themes of the continuation, the wide receivers, the rookies. I think a lot more people are leaning into the upside scenarios versus kind of median outcomes. I think there's some downsides to that. I think there's some going too far. I think there's some improper evaluation of what upside truly is, caring more about what it looks like when you do hit it and not enough of what is the actual likelihood of hitting that upside. It's been a fantastic few years, and I think each year we kind of see the meta continues to shift a little. And some things are progressive, like the wide receivers moving, but some things it's just unique to this year, like tight ends. I feel like are so different from how I'm approaching it this year to how I've approached the last few years.
Yeah, very much so. Like last year felt like the year of the early quarterbacks with like 3 of them going within the first sort of 25, 30 picks. And then this year it's like you've got just a bunch of tight ends being pushed up, and every year really is different. Like when you won BBM going back a few years ago, you did it with a hyper fragile team, but then you've had a success with like a bunch of different types of teams in different formats. Is there one constant favorite way that you like to build, or you just find yourself constantly adapting to what each year gives you and what each draft room gives you?
Yeah, no, it just continues to shift each year. I mean, yes, that was like what 2020, something like that, 4 years ago for the first BBM. And yeah, so many of my teams that year were hyper fragile because I saw substantial value in kind of getting my 4 running backs, making that kind of the strength of the team because I knew I could still find strong players with upside in the later rounds. Garrett Wilson was going like in the 12th round his rookie year. And so because I knew that like, hey, there were still guys that I really liked in these later rounds, I was okay with giving up those early rounds for wide receiver. That next year, we started seeing more and more people do the hyper fragile strategy. And so what that led is you kind of had the running backs were getting pushed up so that people were trying to like, hey, let me grab 4 early to copy this meta. And what I started moving that year was, you know what? I still liked getting 1 or 2 early, but then I waited a bunch because then the guys who should have been kind of 6th, 7th rounds were getting pulled up to like the 4th and the 5th. And I thought there was value then if you went and waited to like the 11th, 12th round, and maybe I went with then more of the 5 running back. And then the next 2 years, we start seeing all the wide receivers moving and people being like, well, hey, I can't get locked out of the wide receivers. And so that's where I've moved a lot more into the 0 and hero RB. And there's all these different draft strategies that you can employ. The key is not to kind of go in saying, hey, this is the one that I'm locked into. But evaluating what the landscape, what the meta looks like for that year, and then thinking through what makes the most sense for, where your beliefs, where your stands, where your larger strategies are.
Nice. Appreciate everyone here in the chat tonight. We are going to get into a draft very soon, but if you're here, hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button. Over the next couple of weeks, we've got loads more great guests coming on. We've got John from the Badge Bros, Justin's ETR colleague John Daigle next week for a DraftKings draft, Steph Miller, a legendary upside, Ian Hartitz, Pete Overzet, loads of people bringing you their knowledge. Justin, you've had success on both DraftKings and Underdog. Do you ever find it difficult, like switching between the different scorings and the ADPs and the mindset of the draft rooms when you're doing that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it's something that I'm very conscious of. And I think that the way that I approach the Underdog and the half PPR sites compared to the way that I approach a DraftKings draft with full PPR with the bonuses with 20 rounds are very, very different. And I think that's probably one of the kind of largest gaps in whether it's content or whether it's just the larger kind of market sentiment is, because, hey, here are the rankings, here's the way we draft. People just kind of adapt one or the other and just think, hey, I'm just going to employ this same strategy. And truthfully, it'll probably work pretty well on one of the two sites, but then you're probably lacking a little on the other. And so, you know, we only have a certain amount of time, but like at a high level, I'd say like, hey, make sure you think through that. And I've done articles, content, lots of this in the past on it. But just make sure you're very, take concerted effort, very specific around how you kind of draft in those two sites.
Yeah, and the fact that you guys pump out so much DraftKings content and, best ball content around different sites is one of the reasons I'll forever be a subscriber, because there's so many people who still aren't paying much attention to the DraftKings product. And I get it. I'm fully aware of the problems with it. I've whinged enough about it on Twitter this week as it is. But you look back last year and you're still talking about close to 1 million people entering their flagship show. There's definitely a gap in the market for more analysis. Do you find that because they don't publish their data in the same way that Underdog do or FFPC do you find it tricky to make assumptions about what the field's doing on DraftKings, or do you feel like you've been in enough of these draft rooms now where you've got a fairly good idea of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, the lack of the publishing data, I think, is huge. I think all the way from the top of the funnel with, hey, people want to have more confidence when they're making these strategic decisions. And when they can follow the likes of the research that comes out from Leone or any of the other kind of great people in the industry who have done research, they can say, hey, I make this pick, I'm doing it because there's data support my strategy. With DraftKings, there's not that kind of data. There's a lot of people who are thinking about it. There's a lot of kind of, very intuitive thoughts that probably make sense strategically. But when you don't have that kind of data supporting it, one, it's a lot more difficult for a content creator, for an analyst out there to confidently publish something. So there's just not as much focus on it. And then for people that are actually drafting, yes, you could still go out and like if you in that one draft, you may feel pretty good about it. But you definitely don't have that same level of confidence because there's not the kind of data driven analytics around not only what strategy should you be employing, but what's happening in the larger field. How crazy are some of these actual super teams that people are drafting on DraftKings versus, when things are more likely to get thrown out on other sites? A lot of considerations.
Yeah, so let's jump in and we'll keep chatting as we go. But in terms of the teams, like we see an awful lot of people complaining about those and complaining about the types of drafts that we see on DraftKings. But I think when you look back at the winning teams all the way back to Felix, who won it like 3 years ago, and then you look back at the team that won it this year, the team that won it the year before, there's none of them where I think there's no way I could have built that team. There's points where you go, okay, I'm not sure I would have built that team, the team who won a couple of years ago with 4 quarterbacks and one of them being Jordan Love and another Jacoby Brissett. So I think there's definitely something in people being worried about those when perhaps they don't need to. And I think the biggest thing, I mean, my player takes last year were pretty bad. I had far too much Rashad Bateman, far too much J.K. Dobbins, far too much Cooper Kupp, and the list goes on. But I still advanced at like a 28% rate on DraftKings, and I think as long as you're cognizant of draft structure and how you're building and scooping up ADP value, then it's definitely a platform where you can still succeed. Question in the chat, which we'll just touch on quickly before we get to the draft where we're picking up the 3 spot. What do you make of the new DraftKings 4-week best ball contest we just rolled out? Have you been deep in the weeds on them yet, or kind of just taking a slow approach to it?
I love it. Anytime a new kind of game format comes out that kind of changes the way we need to think about strategy, it's right up my alley. It's one of the reasons why I first started diving so heavily into best ball way back in the day. So for this, and we have actually been in the ETR lab working on putting an article out. So we should have an article out probably today, if not tomorrow, on it that Jack Miller is kind of leading and I'm helping with. But we talk about a lot of the themes that you should be, considering there. Obviously, suspended players like Rashee Rice or injured players, they're going to be a lot less valuable. They may not even play in those first 4 weeks. The rookies that you expect to kind of ramp up as the season goes on, those also are going to be less valuable because they may be more on a pitch count. They may not get even Justin Jefferson back in his rookie year. I think it was like old BC Johnson or whatever was touted as being playing above him for those first kind of week or two until it tilted. So in those, I mean, there's the rookie aspect, there's the injury aspect, There's the week 4 matchups component to it. Are you actually doing game stacks in that week 4 segment? The week 4, the championship is also a third of the season rather than what we're used to it being the fourth, because they combine the first 2 weeks. So lots of things to be thinking there. I think it's a really interesting format. And if you're an ETR sub, we should have an article on it out probably today, if not tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then today.
Excellent stuff. So we are at 103. Christian McCaffrey goes off first, and then so CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Bijan Robinson, all the usual suspects at the top. Have you got a strong lean for this first pick, depending on what the player at the 102 does?
No, I mean, this early, I'm probably just going pretty chalky. I would go Tyreek Hill from an ADP standpoint, and I like Tyreek Hill more than Jamar Chase. I see that you have Chase here. But for me, if you're going to start like kind of wavering away from ADP this early, you're going to get lopsided. So you better feel pretty confident on your stand.
Yeah, so for me, I do have Jamar Chase just slightly ahead of Tyreek Hill, but it's not one which I feel massively strong about. It's more just expecting Jalen Waddle to have a really good year this year. Like, I'm quite high on him. I'm quite high on the Miami running game to still be good. So I think it's just like the slightest of knocks, whereas I think T. Higgins, that situation still feels so messy that I'm just giving Jamar Chase a slight bump at the minute. But yeah, when I looked at my exposures earlier this week, the one that stood out in the first round immediately to me was Tyreek Hill. I need to start bringing that one up in line closer to Jamar Chase, because I don't know how you approach the first round, Justin, but like generally for me, in a year like this one where the first round feels really good and there are very few players I have doubts about, I want to be at least 5% on kind of all these players if I can be. And last year I took a stance against Christian McCaffrey, thinking maybe the age would catch up with him, and it worked out horribly for me. But generally, I'm going to be looking to be pretty smooth across the first 12. Is there anyone you've been fading in these first 12?
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to take a stand in the first round, but if I do it, I need to have a ton of confidence around why I'm doing it. And so for someone like with the Tyreek Hill to Jamar Chase, if you say like, hey, I feel a tiny bit better about Jamar Chase, well, if you're willing to take that's a huge stand based off a tiny thing, that's not as comfortable for me. Usually where I'm willing to take stands in the first round is on more structural things where, hey, on DraftKings, I like getting a wide receiver usually in the first more. So I'm probably, in this I'm looking right now, I would have taken Puka ahead of probably Bijan and Breece Hall. Then maybe I go to the running backs. But like, even if the running backs ADP, hey, we're hearing a lot of great things about Bijan, start moving above like the Jefferson, the Amon-Ra, the Chase, any of those. I usually like a better construction around the wide receivers. So like maybe that's where I'd be willing to take my stand. As of now, I don't have any huge stands in those first kind of 9. I would put Puka instead of AJ Brown and then call that my first 9. And then after that, I think it starts getting really interesting. Like there's not like strong considerations there. So maybe depending on the contest, I also might start just building some unique roster construction for those first 2. But what I'm doing in the millionaire, it's way too early for that. I'll wait till August for that. But for these more time box contests.
Yeah, so you mentioned before we got on that you were 26 drafts into this. Are you planning on waiting a little while before really hammering this contest?
Yeah, I mean, I would say of the contest, it's one of my lesser important ones, even though like the prize is the highest. It's just the finals is what 1,000 some teams. So it really is that crapshoot. So like I did 26 of these last month because that's what the promo was. If they continue to do a promo of a month, they'll continue to do those promos. But while I think these are some of the softest drafts come August, I also am focusing my time on kind of more important contests for me, either higher buy-in or the best ball mania come August.
Yeah, so we're back on the clock. We've got obviously Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Devin Achane, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, all kind of there in ADP. For me, it's probably Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. Yeah.
Yep, I'm good with either of those. From the ADP, I'd go Ayuk before Deebo. And yeah, I'm more of a Ayuk on DK, Deebo on underdog, a half PPR.
Is that because you're kind of prioritizing the touchdowns on underdog in that half PPR format?
Yeah, I mean, Deebo has that additional value where on the ground, and more likely to get kind of those, end around screen touchdowns. Where Ayuk, if someone's going to become like a target hog in that offense, it's more likely to be Ayuk.
Yeah. So the CMC drafter gets Jonathan Taylor falling to them and then follows it up with Derrick Henry. I'll come back to that one in a minute. It's definitely a strong way to start it off in terms of your running back room. Travis Kelce has dipped a little bit. He got as high as pick 23. Do you want to go with Kelce and lock in an elite tight end, or Debo, Cooper Kupp, Devonta Smith? All three of the wide receivers are guys I like.
I like the Debo here. I would probably say, hey, we're going with the pass catching for San Francisco. Ayuk and Debo across the entire season can definitely correlate together.
It also gives a nice, it gives a nice contingent value. If one of them gets traded, then you open up two potential superstars instead of just ping ponging a bit. But I want to pick your brain on how you're dealing with the 101 at the minute, just because like it feels like you can build slightly stronger hero RB teams, or maybe slightly better round 1, round 2 starts if you are going with Bijan or Breece Hall, because the quality of wide receiver at that end of draft is really good. And sometimes if you're in a wide receiver heavy draft room, by the time it gets down to the 212, you can be looking at Mike Evans, Malik Neighbors, Cooper Kupp as your wide receiver 1 if you go dual RB. Are you finding yourself going just straight out CMC and then taking 2 of the wide receivers no matter what's there, or do you ever mix in these dual running back starts?
Yeah, I almost always doing McCaffrey and 2 wide receivers. I'm trying to think through who would I be willing to pair McCaffrey. I think honestly Gibbs would have to fall to me for me to start building McCaffrey with another running back. Wide receiver is just so important. Going 2 running backs in your first 3 rounds on DraftKings is rarely the right play. I also feel more confident that there's always kind of falling running back values and upside that I can target later in drafts when you're already devoting 2 of your first 3 rounds on a PPR format to to running backs. One puts you behind the 8 ball at the wide receiver position, which I think is the most important on DraftKings, and 2, it limits how much value you can get, falling value later on with running backs if you've already got 2 of those spots plugged.
Yeah, and as Deft Angel says in the chat, no 4th round Breece Hall this year either, which made it so much easier to build, knowing that, okay, well, I'm going to take one of my running back spots there. How have you been dealing with Travis Kelce? Because obviously he goes a lot higher on DraftKings than he does on Underdog. And it just kind of felt a little unmotivated because when drafts open, he wasn't right up there, but he seems to have rocketed over the last couple of weeks. Are you happy taking him at pick 23, 25, that sort of range?
Yeah, I think he's a little rich on DraftKings with his ADP. For me, I'm still a bit concerned that they are going to do some load management for Travis Kelce throughout the season.
I mean, it worked last year.
Yeah. And so you have a couple things going with that. One is, first off, we saw the load management. Okay, we saw it, but that could just be kind of fluky. Let's take it with a grain of salt. Then we hear the coach after the Super Bowl specifically saying that there was load management for Travis Kelce in those weeks leading up. Okay, now what we saw, we're getting confirmation. And now even just yesterday or today, we get another interview where Travis Kelce is talking about he understands that even though he wants to be out there on every snap, it's not going to happen. So I still think, we saw Travis Kelce can still be an absolute hero. He was in the playoffs last year, but I do think that is legitimate load management. And at that early 3rd round price tag, that's too much. On Underdog, I think it makes more sense. I think he's going on the 4th or so. So that's a major ADP difference that I don't truly understand.
Yeah, so we're back on the clock. Isaiah Pacheco's fallen 7 spots past ADP. We've got Lamar and Mark Andrews around the corner still. Mahomes, McBride, Josh Jacobs, Marquise Brown. Any strong instinct? Do you want to scoop the value on Pacheco?
I'm fine with Pacheco. I'm fine with doing a Lamar with the Mark Andrews. Let's do we can go with the value for the Pacheco. We're still building for that Brock Purdy, so it's probably a bit too early to kind of lock ourselves into a QB.
Yeah, and being a Ravens fan, I've streamed an awful lot of drafts where guests come on and we somehow end up with Lamar Jackson stacks, and I've got to give viewers at least a little bit of difference at some point. So the guy at the 101 follows up his 3 running backs with Anthony Richardson in what is definitely an interesting build, not something I'd do. Like you say, like in full PPR formats, you're really gonna need those 3 running backs to hit their 3-point bonuses so often to be able to keep up with some of the top end wide receivers. And already you're looking at a team that okay, yeah, James Cook goes.
It's not a good build. It's a horrible build. It's just really poorly done. Even if you say you wanted to go 3 wide receivers, all right, we are back up. I'll finish that in a minute.
Yes.
I don't mind elite tight end, Trey McBride. I'm okay with here.
Yeah, Trey McBride works for me. Otherwise, it's kind of getting down to the likes of Keenan Allen or Terry McLaurin. So we'll lock in Trey McBride.
I like Trey McBride.
Carry on.
So I was going back to, even if you were to go through running backs and you're like, you know what, I'm going with these 3. Their bye weeks. Nope, their bye weeks even overlap. Whatever. We can't give them any credit. Even if you say I'm going 3 running backs, I'm only going to draft 3 running backs. I'm going to draft only 1 more later on. You can't now waste another pick on a QB. Now, Anthony Richardson, I like him and everything. And maybe you can convince yourself the correlation aspect with Jonathan Taylor, but like, you need to get these wide receivers. We can look back at the team at the end of the draft, and it's going to be so bad with wide receivers. And it gets to a point where you just cannot make up for the lack of quality early with quantity later on. And so let's say you really like, hey, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, you got the falling value with Jonathan Taylor. I'm willing to say that's an okay start. But now your next 3, you really probably should be going wide receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to go back. Last year, when we drafted together, we had a room that got pretty funky. We drafted a Bengals mega stack that day: Kyle Pitts, Marvin Mims, Tank Bigsby, Elijah Mitchell, Elijah Moore, Hollywood Brown. And we ended up in a situation where we ended up having to take Baker Mayfield and Jimmy G as our unstacked QB2 and QB3. It definitely felt like when I went back and looked at it and looked at the draft board and the values and stuff, I was like, this is a classic DraftKings draft which just got out of control. And there's a couple of things in here that are a bit different. You see the team out of one spot with 4 running backs and Anthony Richardson quite early. You look at the team which has gone double elite quarterback in Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. That feels fairly normal. Sometimes, you'll see that. I don't agree with it. Dalton Kincaid going as the tight end 3 on the 4-1 turn. At least that draft, it feels like a plan. They've got a nice Buffalo stack going, and it's a little bit different. But what's like when things get wild like that, do you have one particular mantra that you try to stick to?
I would just say I think what you're doing right now by taking a look at the draft board and seeing where there may be some wonkiness is important, and for us to kind of keep an eye out. And so, for example, we have the double elite QB. If the Mahomes, the Stroud, the Richardson end up taking our QB here as well, you may start seeing like a rush on QBs in those mid rounds. And so we just want to stay ahead of that. Same thing, like if you start seeing multiple people go bully tight end, multiple tight ends and the elite guys, same thing, you maybe start seeing a bit of a chain reaction. Overall, I agree, like nothing stands out too crazy. I assume that this 1.01 is not just going to only take running backs. I assume that the ADOS with the elite QBs isn't going to draft another for a while. But when you start seeing the double down, the 3 QBs early, that's when you really just want to stay cognizant of what's happening with the draft and where you want to make sure you're not getting caught behind a bit of a train.
Yeah, so we're back up. Xavier Worthy, Evan Ingram, DeAndre Hopkins, Lad McConkey. I've been taking a lot of DeAndre Hopkins. I'd also be open to Lad McConkey here, or Rome Odunze, even Rashee Rice, but maybe we can wait on that one around the corner. Yep. Justin, anyone who
I'm good with the wide receiver. I'm good with any of the wide receivers, Worthy, Hopkins, whatever.
I'd say Hopkins. I don't really understand why he's going behind Calvin Ridley. And everybody says, age. And I think you guys talked about this recently. It's not that much of a difference in age. And virtually every stat that you look at, all the advanced stats, Hopkins did better than Ridley last year. And I just have more faith in him continuing to be good. So we've got one more pick before us. We've got Aaron Jones, Zamir White, Dak Prescott, Rome Odunze, Rashee Rice, who feels like somebody who would get good closing line value on at some point. Or we could look at a running back if there's any of these guys in this range you're particularly strong on.
Nothing jumps out. If Dave Montgomery was available, I might have done that one for the bring back to our San Francisco stuff. But I like the Rashee Rice here. We have Pacheco. We're investing in that Kansas City offense. Rashee Rice is definitely someone who, if we feel that we can beat this, we can beat our opponents in this pod. We've already got a couple of bad drafters. Then Rashee Rice sets us up well for the playoffs, assuming he is back then. So he's the one that I'm willing to kind of take a chance on, especially when I think that we can kind of out battle this room.
Yep. And if you're looking at the screen and seeing all these numbers on here, this Spike Week overlay, if you want to get access to it, you can join our channel by hitting the join button down below, choosing the gold tier, and getting a massive 40% off all Spike Week odds, all Spike Week products. It really does change the way you draft. So in terms of our draft so far, we've got a 151 out of 103. Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, Isaiah Pacheco, Trey McBride, DeAndre Hopkins, and Rashee Rice. How are you feeling about it, Justin?
Yeah, I like it. This is when I want to start kind of thinking through, like, hey, with our stacks and where else we're looking. So we know we're obviously not getting Mahomes for the Kansas City. We can consider Will Levis. Tua and Purdy is a decent combination. I know Purdy we definitely want to have. So this is when I'd be looking to see, like, okay, what's Purdy's ADP, and then what picks do we have that line up so we can kind of fit in to make sure that we can get, and we can also start looking to see, like, where's the Kittle, where's the McCaffrey, are we competing against? So his ADP is 97.8. If we look at the draft board, we're talking. I wish these really had the numbers, but
so we're at pick 8. We're on pick 83 now, so it's going to be around that next turn where we'd end up wanting to take him. But yeah,
that end up 94.
Yeah, so definitely, and with the way that QBs have gone in this room, I wouldn't be surprised if this next round there's a couple more of them who go. It does feel like we've got some fairly decent drafters at the back end. You've got teams that started wide receiver heavy and seem quite cognizant of what they're doing, and it's just a bit more chaotic to the left-hand side, which might be problematic for us, but also might leave us some opportunities. In terms of the teams, you've got a Brian Thomas team that might look for Trevor Lawrence. You've got a Terry McLaurin team that might be looking for Jaden Daniels, but probably not this early. Yeah, I think
the only thing I'm looking at here is the George Kittle right there with the Young Ho. That maybe that's someone who ends up wanting to grab Purdy. But like, end of the day, we can't worry about what's before us. We actually are looking at what's behind us. And so to look to see, like, hey, if Purdy was to fall to us, would it make sense for us to wait another 4 picks? But because McCaffrey is there, even though the guy has Anthony Richardson, we already know he's a bit of a wild card. Maybe he grabs Purdy. So if Purdy's available, I think we just take that. And then unless there's just like a screaming amazing value that we really want.
Yeah, that works for me. So in terms of what we've got, being a few picks away, Joe Burrow falling 16 spots past ADP. Keep seeing that happening. Jordan Love just after him. So there's a couple of quarterback cushion. David Njoku, Jonathan Brooks, who I do like, and then Brock Purdy. So should we take Purdy if assuming this drafter doesn't take him? And then
let's take a look at the running backs to see, like, hey, is there a running back that we really don't want to miss out on?
Jonathan Brooks would be the main one out of that tier, and then but I'm okay pushing that around if you are.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I do like Brooks, but I think it's more important that we get Purdy and that the wild card in the 1.01 doesn't take him from us.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to imagine the team at the 101 isn't going to take another running back here, so it really kind of comes down to the team at the 102. Let's see what we do, and in that round where
grab the QB. Grab the third QB. Yep.
And then Joe Burrow does go. So do you want to take Jonathan Brooks here as our second running back? Or
yes, please.
Where are we at? There we go. So yeah, in terms of the draft board, it felt like there was going to be a quarterback running that range, and we see Kyler Murray go at the 8-3, Dak Prescott at the 8-7 to a team without CD Lamb unstacked. Kyler Murray went to a team without Marvin Harrison. Jared Goff did go to a team with the Lions stack. This one here is built quite a heavy line stack with Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, David Montgomery. And then Jordan Love unstacked and Jaden Daniels unstacked to the team out of a one hole with a 3-4-1-1-1 build. 11-team league it is. Joe Burrow goes to the T. Higgins drafter, which makes plenty of sense, particularly at that ADP fall. That should have noticed that really and assumed that he was going to go there. in terms of DraftKings in general, Justin, are you building more 2 or 3 quarterback teams when you're drafting on here?
DraftKings, I usually end up doing 3 QB teams. It's either if I grab an early one, I'll still probably end up with 3, but just spending very, very little draft capital until the very end. If I'm doing someone like Purdy, I'm still probably going to end up with another 2 more. For me, it comes down to with the extra rounds, especially when you're drafting this early in the summer, we have far more confidence in what we can get out of a 17th, 18th, 19th round quarterback than what you're getting from the other positions. Hey, maybe this running back is going to be the number 2. Maybe this wide receiver is going to work itself into kind of 3 wide receiver sets. But for QBs, we do have more confidence. There's also just some substantial good values in the later ones that I do like. So that doesn't mean I'm going to go 3 late QBs, because I do think there is some value, especially from a stacking standpoint, in grabbing one of the kind of early mid-range guys. But I do still often end up with 3. We did lose out to Tua, who Young Ho went with a naked Tua. So that's an interesting one. I know who was it over here? I saw Waddle, the Waddle drafter I thought was the one who was going to be drafting. Yeah. CJW doesn't have a QB, misses out on Waddle. I'm sure that people are tilting in this draft right now.
Yeah. Locking in Purdy definitely was a nice move to make, because it just feels when you get this kind of run, even the late targets, so you can go, okay, well, I'll start looking for my Drake Mays. I'll start looking for what can I build around Bo Nix or even those guys. You just don't know when these people are going to stop. You're looking at outside of 2 teams at the back end of the draft, everybody has at least one. A vast majority of the teams in here have at least 2 quarterbacks, and it can just get pretty miserable pretty quickly and feel a little bit shaky. So I definitely think spending time looking at the draft board is a massive advantage. And up until last year, we didn't even have that on DraftKings, and that very much the moment DraftKings brought that out, I do far more drafts on my computer than I do on my phone these days because of that. So we are sitting on a 1-2-5-1 with Pacheco and Brooks as our running backs. With these 2 players through 9 rounds, do you think we'll need to get up to 6 running backs, 7 running backs? Where do you kind of feel on that at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's probably in my mind just a little too early to kind of try to lock us into. And, I'm actually far more likely on an 18 round format, kind of thinking through what my roster positions are. But on 20, the difference between 6 and 8, if those extra 2 are in the 19th and 20th, like it's not that much of a difference. And 6 and 7 is virtually nothing if we're talking a 20th round running back. It's far more important thinking through like what your capital looks like around this spot, what your capital looks like maybe the next 2-4 rounds and such. And so I'm far more thinking through like, okay, I'm thinking through stacks. I'm thinking, okay, maybe Tyjae Spears can fall to us with this next pick. Running back, there he just goes. But that would have been a position of need. The Tennessee, I still think we could get Shig and Tyler Boyd and Will Levis later on to really go with that Tennessee stack. And then we start thinking through the maybe Gabe Davis as the bring back for the Tennessee stack. So that's what I'd say my focus more. I do like Devin Singletary, I think at a position of need. And yeah, I'd probably go Devin Singletary.
Yeah, I've been drafting plenty of Devin Singletary. I know that Tyrone Tracy is picking up a little steam and plenty of like buzz, but I just think you look at what Devin Singletary did last year with like 19 touches a game from week 10 onwards, and he was solid. He was good. There's no reason why it feels like New York would bring him in with a coaching staff who know him to then not give him a fair crack at it. And also, Devin Singletary pairs well with Jonathan Brooks. If we're not expecting huge workloads from Brooks early in the season, then Devin Singletary works for me. We are back up in 1 pick. In terms of players at the top of ADP, you're looking at Nick Chubb, Mike Williams, Trevor Lawrence, Blake Corum, Jacoby Myers, Chase Brown, Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford would give us a bit of week 17 correlation, but maybe we'd lose him by that point. Anybody you really like?
I'd go Chase Brown here. Going for the upside, strong offense, 1 injury to Zach Moss, or maybe even getting 30-40% of the workload and finding his way to a larger role. I really would have liked Gus Edwards before that. I like Gus Edwards a lot more on half PPR scoring, but I do think that like we're getting a little value in that Gus Edwards standpoint. For the Devin Singletary, I think the battle we should be watching out for with the Tyrone Tracy is him and Eric Gray. because I actually think that Eric Gray ends up being the number 2 there. And if we do see him as the number 2, that's actually extremely good news for Devin Singletary, because we know who Eric Gray is. We don't really know that much about Tyrone Tracy. So if Tracy actually wins that battle, that's a pretty strong feather in Tracy's cap to begin with. And that gives, more concern that maybe Tracy actually has a chance at being better than Devin Singletary at this point in his career and earning that job. If it's Eric Gray as the number 2, now it's like we know he's not going to steal the work from Devin Singletary. He's just a, worse version of Devin Singletary. And so that's where I'm kind of focusing, not so much on are one of them going to beat Singletary in the preseason, but who wins that battle and then what we can take from that.
Yeah, we've got a question in the chat from Deft Angel. Does Justin have a wide receiver cutoff he would be bearing in mind in these middle rounds? So I'm assuming that means are you looking to get to a certain number of wide receivers by say round 8, round 9, round 10? Typically, I know on Underdog that a lot of conversation goes around 5 before round 9, but it feels quite difficult to do that sometimes in drafts this year.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I interpreted the question differently. I thought he was asking where is my cutoff in wide receivers before I start going to other positions, but I can kind of answer both of those. For me this year, it's kind of that JSN. After JSN, I think first off, I think the wide receiver median and upside scenarios are a strong tier drop from the next group of wide receivers, and also that's where there are a large group of running backs, a large group of QBs that I see myself drafting a lot. So I'm often trying to kind of stack and make sure I have at least 4, and here's to your answer, at least 4, sometimes 5 before I get to that JSN. And it's probably more on the DraftKings side. I kind of want to get more, focusing more on the wide receivers. On the half PPR stuff, that's where it's maybe I'm more okay with just having 4.
Yeah, that makes plenty of sense, and a nice double dip on the answer. So through 11 rounds, we have Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Isaiah Pacheco, Trey McBride, DeAndre Hopkins, Rashee Rice, Brock Purdy, Jonathan Brooks, Devin Singletary, and Chase Brown. We did have a question earlier in the chat. I'll try to just jump back to it. Somebody saw you draft Jonathan Brooks in the new format where things set over only 4 weeks. What gives? Are you expecting Jonathan Brooks to be a value in that format if he ends up clearing camp injury stuff?
Yeah, so the most recent report today is that he's probably not going to be ready for training camp, which I think we considered to be the case all along. I believe in the team you were talking about, I most likely had a Bengals stack. And in that Bengals stack, Carolina is the week 4 opponent for the Bengals. And so that was a nice little bring back. And it is possible that, we still expect a slower ramp up. The reports from early in the summer that he'd still be available week 1. And even if that's the case, I still think that. Oh, we are on the clock now.
Yeah.
I like Rico. I'd probably go Rico here. I think there's a running back drop off after that. I can give my thoughts on downs. I'm not actually a huge fan of drafting downs.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I like. Sorry, go on.
I was gonna say, so the thought process for me with Josh Downs is if we get to the playoff weeks and Josh Downs has a huge week, in that scenario, Anthony Richardson probably also had a very big week. Because Anthony Richardson, we already know, is getting his points on the ground. If he also has a PPR receiver like Josh Downs, who's having a big game, 100+ yards, touchdown, now Anthony Richardson has also done it through the air. So we're kind of trying to thread the needle and say, hey, we want Josh Downs to have a big game, but not Anthony Richardson because I don't have him. Now, if I stack Anthony Richardson, I love going with his Colts pass catchers, but otherwise, guys like him where we know they can get it done on the ground, and the days that they have the big, or the years they have the big passing, we kind of want to make sure we have that QB.
Okay, cool. Well, we're on the clock, so I'll come back to that in a minute. But in terms of wide receivers, Gabe Davis gives a little week 17 correlation. Yep. Pat Frymouth who'd give us correlation as well. Gabe or Frymouth?
I would go with Gabe, but I'm okay with either. Yep.
No, it's good. I'm fine with Gabe. I think, obviously it gets so much hate in the drafting streets, and I think that when you look at what he does and the big week potential, it feels completely fine. So yeah, my play on Josh Downs is, I definitely understand where you're coming from on the Anthony Richardson side of things. I just think that there's a very good chance that he's going to be far more consistently reliable than AD Mitchell. And much as I like Michael Pittman, I think there's a chance that perhaps he ends up being a little bit overpriced this year based on what the offense might end up doing. So Josh Downs just feels like the right kind of player in the right kind of range at the right kind of price where I don't mind clicking him, particularly if I'm sitting at about 4 or 5 wide receivers and just need somebody who I can project into a role and know, okay, I'm going to get a consistent sort of points from him. So that's kind of my mindset on him. So more quarterbacks going off the board. Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins going in round 12, and Aaron Rodgers, Sean Watson, Baker Mayfield in round 13. So for us, obviously, Will Levis with Tennessee would be probably our main stack that's out there. And then we can look at potential running back stacks or something like that, or potential other players to backdoor our way into. I know you guys did a great episode covering your favorite backdoor stacks. It feels like the Patriots is everybody's last team at the dance, such to be backdoor stacking. But does anything else stand out with our build of teams that you'd be considering?
Yeah, so I mean, this is definitely the time of the draft where, as you just said, I'd be looking to figure out what is that third backdoor stack that we are going to build, because there's no one in the current roster besides the Will Levis that we want to be going after. I think Will Levis's ADP is just after our 166. So if he falls to us, I'd say, hey, let's get Will Levis first and then look at other wide receivers and tight ends. Geno Smith and a Noah Fant isn't a bad one. I did see Adam Thielen there. We have Jonathan Brooks. I don't know if Thielen went, but you could have done the Bryce Young. I don't really like going with the Giants one because I'm definitely concerned. Oh, Will Levis just went. That's tough. Okay.
Do we want to look at one of the Denver wide receivers and maybe looking at Bo
Can we look at the
Nix, or do you
QB?
want to go?
Yeah, who are the QBs that we have right now? I would say go with Geno. I think Geno as a number 2 QB is just a step above the rest. And we know we can still maybe grab that Noah Fant that's 202. We could probably wait a Noah Fant there.
Yeah, we can wait. And there's a good bunch ahead of him.
So yeah, wide receivers could go with, let's see.
We could take a New England one and kind of give ourselves a little bit of room. It'll be a bit of a reach. Or we could be looking at Troy Franklin, which gives us some Cincinnati correlation with Chase Brown as it is, and then maybe consider Bo Nix at QB. After that, you start looking at maybe the Steelers guys who correlate with KC.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So Denver, Cincy, we don't have any bang. Oh, we did take Chase Brown, you said. Yeah, so
Chase Brown, yeah.
And was Troy Franklin still available? I'd probably go with the Troy Franklin and then kind of plan on that Bo Nix.
Out of Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims, have you been taking a lot more of one than the other?
Well, they made our decision easier there. I'm trying to think. I think ETR has Marvin Mims a little ahead of Troy Franklin. But I think I'd rather go with the Troy Franklin from an upside. Like, it's going to be a frustrating play. We may not see him on the field for a bit, but if we're playing for the playoffs or we're playing for upside, I mean, just Sean Payton has said everything positive about Marvin Mims, but never let him see the field. And I don't know why we expect it's tough. I could see arguments for both of them. I'll probably play it like ADP for, most of the summer.
Yeah, so we got a team in the middle with a 4-3-4-4, which isn't a build I've seen. George Kittle with Hawkinson, Taysom Hill, Jonnu Smith, Derek Carr with Trevor Lawrence, Tua, and Dak Prescott. So we're definitely seeing some interesting stuff going on here. The team
we have a zero tight end from CE Burke.
Yeah. That team has a 2.670, so I think they'd be my main concern about Noah Fant. If he makes it past them, I think we should be okay. But there's still Hunter Henry and a few other Titans out there. In terms of a team who started from the 101 with 3 consecutive running backs, CMC, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, Richardson, James Cook. They had Lad McConkey as their only wide receiver inside the first 9 rounds, and then when AD Mitchell,
they only have rookie wide receivers. They literally may not have wide receivers starting. Like, they're not going to have 3 wide receivers starting at week 1.
Yeah, it's almost like you've just set your rankings and things have just gone horribly wrong from there. But yeah, otherwise, there's some nice teams over team at the 12 spot who's got the 2572 with Josh Allen, Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman team. Possibly a bit of a reach what you're giving up at that early in the draft to make that stack happen. But Baker Mayfield stacked with K. Dot and Bucky Irving. There's definitely somebody putting thought process into that one. Daniel Jones going in the 15th round, like the QBs are just getting swallowed up now. Like, so I wouldn't be surprised if we'd struggle to get a third one possibly. But Justin Fields comes off the board. It feels like the last few days there's just been a little bit more hope for Justin Fields that he could be out there soon. Ben Sinnott's fallen 30.
Can we look at QB real quick? And then, okay, so we have Bryce, Drake, Bo, and then tight end, because I'm just trying to decide which one we want to go first.
Yeah, well, this team next to us was the team who took Marvin Mims.
They have one.
So I would.
Okay, I like that then.
One quarterback so far. So take Bo Nix.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
I know they only have one tight end, but there's also a good amount of tight ends available as well that I could see them going after.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you look at that, Hunter Henry, 18 picks past ADP, Ben Sinnott, 30 picks past ADP, 35 picks almost past ADP. Like, I've not seen him fall that far. And then obviously Chigakonkwo, which would have given us a bit more Titans correlation, even without Will Levis. So I think we're fairly safe there. Juwan Johnson goes off the board at that next pick. Have you been drafting much Ben Sinnott?
I have not. I think if you draft Jaden Daniels, it's perfectly fine. It's the stack partner. I think right now he's just a bit overhyped because of what we saw with Sam Laporta, but it's vastly different profiles, draft capital, situations on the team. Zach Ertz first, not having any other tight ends in Detroit last year. I think it's just a very different situation. I would actually pull an audible here and not draft Noah Fant if we can get Jaleel McLaughlin to fall to us.
Ooh, nice.
I think that Jaleel is more important. I'm very bullish on the Broncos passing game. 2 running backs. Last year, they led the, if you want to, go for it. But last year, they led the league in passes to running backs at 33% target share. They also, not only do they pass a bunch, but don't do it very efficiently. For yards per route run, you had Samaje Perine led the league. Jaleel McLaughlin was 6th in the league. And then Javonte Williams was 12th. So they throw to the running backs a ton. They get them open in space. They have strong yards after catch. Like, this is a Sean Payton offense that makes complete sense. We've seen him do it in the past with Alvin Kamara and other running backs. And then they bring Bo Nix in, who's like the king of screens. He's the king of dump offs. So I think somebody in that offense is going to be a huge win from a pass catcher. And there's been some strong hype for Jaleel McLaughlin. I wouldn't be shocked if it is end up being him. And we did draft Trey McBride. So, like, yes, it's nice to get that Geno Smith, Noah Fant stack. And maybe we still can, but it's not as important when, like, hey, we're still counting on McBride for the most part come playoff weeks.
Yeah, I think you can definitely get away with it a little bit more on DraftKings than you can on Underdog in the 18-round format. The league says, I'm at the 12th spot. Feels like a reach on Kincaid, but I needed a bold play. Also ignore the bye weeks. I hadn't clocked the bye weeks, but Baker Mayfield, K-Dot on both on week 11. Then what you've got 4 of your first 5 picks on a week 12 bye. I don't think that's too bad. The running backs, okay. Some week 12, week 14. I don't think that's too bad. Anything there that you'd be worried about?
I would say the bigger thing right now is if you're going to go so heavy on Buffalo, I'd want to see some week 17 bringbacks on the Jet side of things. And I think that's what's kind of lacking on this team as well. I also probably would not have drafted Khalil Shakir. One, I'm just not drafting him that much, but also when you've already invested so much on the Kincaid, on the Keon, taking another, probably a little bit of a reach on Khalil Shakir isn't the most kind of attractive for me.
Yeah, and because this is the kind of room we're in when you now seeing Sam Darnold go off the board in the 18th round, Noah Fant does go, but we can survive without him. In terms of our build, we are sitting at a 3-6-7-1, so we're probably looking for 2 tight ends, despite having Trey McBride, is how I'd feel about it. Is that where you'd look at this, Justin?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And this late, I mean, I think there's still some tight ends that I don't know, are perfectly fine. Of these, I'd probably, yeah, I think we're fine. I think when the time comes,
Yeah.
what do we think our other position is? Probably wide receiver with a stack.
Yeah, McMillan as a rookie to give us some week 17 correlation with Carolina with Jonathan Brooks feels like a nice little bet which we could make. In terms of other players, there's no real wide receivers that stand out to me. I've been taking a decent amount of Jalen Tolbert, running back. Clyde Edwards-Helaire I've kind of come around on. Alexander Mattison I've been drafting a little bit of. Any of these guys
I'd say
feel
let's
like
grab one. Let's go back to the tight end. I would start with here. We can go with Jatavion Sanders. Get the kind of upside play to go with McBride, and we've also got the Carolina. And then if you still wanted to do kind of the McMillan for that other pick, I think then you still get a little more investment in that game. I do like Jalen a lot. I think he's going to start in 3 wide receiver set or on the outside pretty quickly into the year with Godwin playing that slot. So I'm good with that one. The other one that I was thinking is maybe like Khalif Raymond, because just someone who's not really drafted often. It gives us a bring back for that San Francisco. So if there's a third tight end that we wanted to grab first, I think like we can assume that Raymond's going to fall back.
Yeah, I've been taking some Tucker Craft. I don't mind Gerald Everett as a hedge against Cole Kmet, but maybe it's a bit thin. We've got 8 seconds.
All right, let's grab Jalen McMillan. Because honestly, even if we ended up with just Jatavion Sanders and Trey McBride, it's not the worst thing. I probably do think our 20th round is best spent as a tight end. But yeah.
Yeah, we've committed a bye weeks in here, both on week 11 buys, so we possibly need to see what comes to us. But if there's one position where I think you can eat a 0, then it's probably the tight end position, given how difficult it can be. Theo Johnson goes off the board after us. Is he the New York Giants tight end that you're most likely to take a shot on, or do you prefer Daniel Bellinger?
Yeah, keeping an eye on things. There was a report that came out today about Daniel Bellinger that he has been kind of sitting out a bit, had an injury from a couple weeks ago. They don't know how long term it's going to be. They've also been giving a bit more reps with him. I think it was like just taking a little break, breather, injury, whatever it is. So I would say, like, hey, we love the I don't know, not the prospect profile. We love the athletic profile. We love the RAS score of Theo Johnson. Comes out of Penn State, where it's just a ton of athletes, and we know we've seen it before. He's going to have an opportunity, I think, with a Darren Waller retirement, especially if this Bellinger injury is more serious than we're initially thinking. He's going to have that opportunity. We saw Bellinger have the opportunity his rookie year right away. So I would say I was pretty high on him before the draft. 4th round draft capital scares me a little. I don't love New York Giants as the destination, but if the opportunity opens up, I'm willing to kind of start drafting him again. So I've got my eye on that situation, I would say right now. But the way that person in the 4th did it with a late round stack of, their last 6 picks have all been Giants. Wando Robinson, Daniel Jones, Tyron Tracy, Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slade, Theo Johnson. So if you're going to go all in on a team, I don't hate that. I don't hate doing it that way.
What's like the most you ideally want to stack a team? Like, particularly if we're talking about one of these more later round ones where the teams it's a bit more accessible to do them. Do you stop at 3, 4 players, or are you okay going as insane as that one?
And so it's less to me about the raw total and more about the draft capital. If I'm drafting Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and I get the Joe Burrow, I'm less likely to I'm less likely to also to go add on Yoshi and Jermaine Burton and Gesicki. Like, I'm perfectly, content just saying like, hey, the offense is going through those 2 guys. I spent a lot of draft capital. Now, later on in drafts, when we're talking 14th, 15th, and plus rounds, like we saw here with the Giants, I'm perfectly fine with loading it up for 5, 6 to a stack because your capital is not nearly as high. And if you are right and Daniel Jones has that great year and it's through the air, it's far more easy for those guys to surpass their value. And when we're taking kind of just dart throws so late in drafts, it's great to kind of correlate it.
Yeah, That makes sense. So we're a few picks away. Looking at guys like Greg Dulcich would give us another bit for our Broncos stack. There's mixed stuff on
Yep, I like
him.
it.
Otherwise, yeah, Colby Parkinson would give us some Arizona correlation for week 17. I don't mind that, but I'm not wild. And then yeah, you've got a lot of real dart throws, really. Have you been taking any Zach Ertz?
No Zach Ertz. Of this group, I have been taking Dawson Knox. I took Tucker Kraft before this injury, but I've slowed down there a lot. I do think Greg Dulcich is the right play here for the way that we built it out with the Denver. At this late in the drafts, the level of confidence anyone can have in any of these guys is minimal. So when you're just not sure, correlate it with your team. And so Greg Dulcich makes complete sense.
Yep. So we finish it out with a 3-6-8-3. Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Debo Samuel, Pacheco, Trey McBride, DeAndre Hopkins, Rashee Rice, Brock Purdy, Jonathan Brooks, Devin Singletary, Chase Brown, Rico Dowdle, Gabe Davis, Geno Smith, Troy Franklin, Bo Nix, Jaleel McLaughlin, Jatavion Sanders, McMillan, and Greg Dulcich. Feels like a pretty good team. I mean, we didn't get any kind of week 17 correlation on the Niners, but in terms of the other games, there's a decent bit of correlation that we picked up throughout. We've got the Bengals and the Broncos correlated with, we've got the Bengals and the Broncos correlated. You can see here with the Spike Week overlay. Chase Brown as the bring back to our Bengals Denver stack. Then on the Carolina Tampa Bay game, we've got Jonathan Brooks, Jalen McMillan, Jatavion Sanders. Perhaps all three rookies don't end up hitting in a meaningful way, but if two of them do, that could be fun. And then DeAndre Hopkins and Gabe Davis. Is that the main sort of thing when you look at this team, you go, I wish we could have got a bit more week 17 correlation, or is there anything else that stands out to you about it?
Yeah. I mean, overall, I think it's a pretty decent team. I think from a draft capital, everything kind of makes sense. I probably would have liked to have had a second wide receiver that's better. I mean, a second QB that's better correlated with our primary guys than just the late. The Levis one really hurt because if we could have gotten the Levis, we then also would have gotten Chig and Tyler Boyd. And so that would have, I think, given me a, hey, DeAndre Hopkins is one of our kind of starting wide receivers. I'm more likely to kind of want to get at least a second stack with my more primary guys. Yes, it is nice to get those late stacks because when the team exceeds our expectations, everyone wins together. But also, what are the chances of kind of like let's say Troy Franklin surpassing our first four wide receivers? Yes, it can happen, but it's less likely. And so even if Troy Franklin and Bo Nix have a really solid game, it's still harder for them to kind of surpass our early talent. So that's where I'd say just the biggest, hey, if we could have got Tua, if we could have got Will Levis, that would have felt a little better. But this was a bit of a wonky room with some of the QB craziness. So Tua going to that Tua going naked to Young Ho, Levis going, I think, naked as well. Like Will
Let's see that
Levis.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they didn't take Ridley. They didn't. Yeah. So just some wonkiness.
Yeah, maybe you could view it as a bring back to Christian Kirk for that kind of week 17 game, but maybe
Did they backstack? If they went with like Chig and Tyler Boyd, I'm willing to give them that credit. But if they didn't, then I think that's just
they had
okay.
Tyler Boyd,
They got
so
Boyd.
yeah.
So maybe there's a little credit there.
Chig went just before their pick. Yeah,
Okay.
so there's definitely maybe something there, but yeah, otherwise on the whole, the lack of stack to Geno feels like a little bit of a ding, but I don't dislike it. I've been building a lot of 3-6-8-3 teams. When you look at what's gotten to the final on DraftKings over the last 2 years, 3-6-8-3 has been massively dominant, and I just don't feel the need to really take big structural stands at this point. If I'm going to get a bit weird with how I build a team, get up to 10 wide receivers or something like that, I'd much rather do that when we get closer to the season. We've got more information. We have a quick question in the chat from Joe, who says, what are your two favorite week 17 games to target? I'll let you go first, Justin, as the guest.
Yeah, so first I'll kind of give larger context that I actually don't think about as, hey, what are my favorite games to target? Because I think most of those are kind of accounted for in the ADP versus how much we kind of like teams. Like, of course, Houston and Baltimore is a great one. Also, Arizona and the Rams with another dome. Like those are teams we're all excited about, but the prices are kind of adjusted accordingly. So for me, it's less about like, hey, let me focus on what are the week 17s that I really like, and more of as the draft is going to me, let me make sure I get a bunch of week 17s in those minis because, and I saw someone asking earlier about kind of the weather aspect. Like last year, people were like, oh, I'm scared of this Cleveland New York Jets game. I'm scared of the weather. That ended up being one of the games you needed with the Brees Hall and the David Njoku kind of mini stacks there. And so similar to this year, you can be, Tua, small hands, cold weather, not playing well in the Cleveland aspect. I'm scared of that game, but I think that's the wrong way to approach things. And rather, as you get the draft, just know I want all the week 17 correlation, both from my main stacks to mini stacks. And it's less about, okay, I want to structure my draft to try to get this game, and this specific game.
Yeah, it's such a difficult thing to predict. I mean, we look back and things, there was certain games which were really the ones that people felt were the must-haves, like the Bengals, Chiefs, and stuff like that, where people are really going out of their way to try and build around them, and you're so far away from it. There's so much that can change. Everybody wanted Derrick Henry against the Texans last year because of the week 15 and 17 thing. Just putting aside the fact that there was new coaching staff in there who had defensive mindset, and it gets a bit tricky. And like you say, I'd just rather find those little mini correlations and little bits like that. But I do very much like the Rams at the Cardinals. I think you look at the Rams defense, and I don't think they're going to be quite there yet. I think Cardinals offense can be a lot more frisky this year and definitely put a bit of pressure on the Rams. Justin, in terms of what you guys have got going on over at Establish the Run, I mean, I'm a subscriber, been a subscriber since day one, big fan of it, and you've launched a new best ball product. For anyone who's unfamiliar, why don't you tell people just how good a value that thing is?
I appreciate it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're not familiar with Establish to Run, we're just always trying to pump out content and provide what's ever most valuable to you, kind of cutting through the noise. So whether it's articles, whether it's rankings, any of that. For me personally, I've got a few different articles on the site to kind of help you approach different tournaments. And every Tuesday at 4 p.m. for subscribers, I will do a live draft, either solo or bringing on some other ETR guys. But, hey, similar to all the great stuff that you're doing over here, Tom, just kind of enjoying this best ball summer, enjoying the time, and trying to help people as much as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. This is it's a great time of year. Mondays we've got underdog drafts, myself and Tyler every Monday. We've got DraftKings every Wednesday. Loads of great guests coming your way. Rich is churning out more Dynasty content. Truly appreciate you coming on, Justin. We'll be back next week. Catch you all soon.